Let's put two and two together. Joshua's struggling financially. He's lied to me about living there. Something's fishy, something's shady. I don't want my boyfriend getting financially supported by another girl. That's disgusting and weird. Like, that's not what I signed up for.
Is it a friendship or a money trap? One woman quits being pleasant and says that her boyfriend's roommate bought his loyalty. A normal dinner in Australia turns into a mental war zone where the only thing on the menu is secrets. This is the most exciting 90-day Fiancé dinner you'll witness this season. This is the Dinner of Deception. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button and switch on notifications. Tonight, we're going to break everything down in a way that will blow your mind. Let's get started. The scene takes place in a dark corner of a stylish Australian restaurant. Pendant lights cast long, unsettling shadows on a table covered in immaculate white linen. 3 meals are empty, 3 glasses of wine are hardly touched, and 3 lives are hanging by a thread that is about to break. Elise, the woman who crossed oceans for love, sits across from Joshua, the man who is stuck in the middle of his own tangled web, and Nat, the woman he has been secretly living with for months. Elise had never even heard of Nat until a few hours before her flight landed. Nobody is smiling, the forced niceties that began the evening. "How was your flight? The weather has been nice, hasn't it?" have already turned into a thick, oppressive stillness. You can practically hear the weight of every whispered truth pushing down on the table like an anvil that isn't there. Elise flew halfway around the world with butterflies in her stomach and dreams in her eyes. She was sure that this was finally the time when her long-distance dream came true. She saw candlelit dinners, secret kisses, and the start of their forever. Instead, she stepped right into a nightmare. The man she loves has been living with another woman the whole time, sharing bills, space, and secrets she was never allowed to know. Joshua moves around in his seat, his gaze going back and forth between the two women like a guy standing on a landmine. Nat looks calm on the outside, but her fingers are gripping her wine glass just a little too tightly. And what about Elise? She looks at both of them with a piercing glare, and the jet-lagged tiredness that was in her body is now a slow, burning fire. This is more than just weird. This is a fight. It all started with one desperate text message that came in like a bomb, just as Elise's plane was about to land in Sydney for the last time. Joshua had been promising her this trip for months. They would talk on the phone late at night, and he would murmur about how great everything would be once she got there, how much he wanted to hold her, and how this was the beginning of their real life together. She saved every penny from her job, bought the ticket, packed her favorite dress, and practiced how she would run into his arms when she got off the plane. She thought of flowers, maybe a ridiculous placard with her name on it, the kind of cliched romanticism she secretly wanted after months of loving someone over a screen. Instead, the message that came through on her phone as the jet taxied said, "I need to tell you something before you get here. I've been living with a friend, a female. It's not what you think. When you land, I'll explain everything. Don't stress out, please." Elise looked at the words until they became blurry. Her stomach fell faster as the plane did. A lady, staying with. Not what you think. The words kept going over in her head like a tune she couldn't stop. She didn't say anything. She wasn't able to. She sat still in her seat, holding onto the armrest, while the flight crew happily told everyone the time and temperature. Joshua was waiting for her when she got through customs, got her suitcase, and walked into the arrivals hall. He was alone, with no sign, no flowers, and the same hoodie she'd seen him wear in video calls 100 times. He seemed smaller than she recalled. The hug was short and awkward, like two people who didn't know where their bodies belonged anymore. He made an effort to smile. She didn't. On the drive to the motel in the car, bits of the truth came out. Nat was her name. They had been living together as roommates for about 8 months. At first, it was merely crashing on the couch because Nat lost her job and couldn't pay the rent. After that, the couch turned into a spare room. Then it became normal. Bills are split. Shared groceries. They talked late at night when neither of them could sleep. He swore over and over that nothing physical ever happened. He said, "She's like a sister," looking straight ahead. "I didn't tell you because I knew how it would sound. I was going to fix it before you came, I swear." Elise sat quietly and watched the city lights go by outside the window. It seemed like he was reading from a screenplay he had practiced in front of the mirror. It sounded worse the more he talked. 8 months. 8 months of communications in which he said he was at home, chilling or just working late, but never once mentioned the woman who was breathing the same air, cooking in the same kitchen, and waking up under the same roof. Joshua said they were being marched directly inside a restaurant for a chance to clear the air. There was no time to think. There wasn't enough time to shout, cry, or even breathe. Elise had just gotten off the aircraft and was still sweating. She had just digested that her boyfriend had a hidden, live-in female closest friend when she was already sitting across from the woman. The secret didn't merely get out. The truth had been dragged out into the open, kicking and screaming, and the dinner table was about to become the courthouse where every Lee omission and half-truth would be put on trial. There has been so much stillness at the table that it feels like the restaurant is holding its breath. Then Nat clears her throat softly, and the sound is almost fragile against the low murmur of the other diners. She leans forward just enough to capture the light. Her stance is open, and her hands rest lightly on the edge of the table, as if she is preparing to present a peace treaty. "I know how this looks," she says in a low, controlled voice, the kind of voice people use when they are trying very hard to sound sensible. "I understand. I'd be mad too, Elise, if I were you, but I need you to listen to me." She stops for a while, looks at Joshua, and then looks back at Elise. There is no defiance there, simply what seems like real regret. "Last year was hard for me. They termed it restructuring, and I lost my job out of the blue. My lease terminated the same month I ran out of money. I was sleeping on friends' couches and moving around to keep from falling apart. Joshua was one of the few people that didn't ignore me when I was at my lowest. He offered the extra room, no strings attached, no expectations, just a place to land until I could get back on my feet." As she talks, her fingers absent-mindedly stroke the stem of her wine glass. "We talked a lot. Late nights, lousy movies, and takeout on the coffee table. Sometimes I would cry, and it would be nasty and messy, but he would just sit there with me. Give me some tissues. Make bad tea. Tell me I wasn't broken, even if I thought I was. He never made it awkward, never went too far. He was simply there. Someone to cry on when I didn't have anyone else." For a moment, Nat's eyes drop down. Then they rise again, steady. "I know people say that, and it seems like an excuse. I understand that it sounds easy, but that's how it is. We live together. We are pals. That's all we've ever been. Elise, I'm not coming to take your boyfriend. He gave me a secure place to stay when I had nowhere else to go. And yes, I might have stayed longer than I should have. I might have relied on him too much, but nothing romantic ever transpired. I promise it on everything that matters to me." She stops talking and leans back a little, breathing out like she's just put down the last card in her hand. The words are in the air, gentle, serious, and nearly believable. To someone who is observing from the outside, it can even sound like the honest confession of someone who got into a bad position that she couldn't help, but Elise's expression stays hard. If anything, the silent intensity in her eyes gets stronger. To her, every word Nat just said seems like a well-rehearsed act. Each detail is polished just enough to avoid responsibility, and each emotion is set just right to make her seem weak without being weak. The shoulder to cry on line hits Elise especially hard because she's heard it before in past relationships and other betrayals. It's the excuse everyone uses, the polite mask people wear when the truth is too messy and personal for anybody to confess. The table is still. Joshua looks at the plate that hasn't been touched. Nat waits with an open, almost optimistic look on her face. And Elise, who is jet-lagged, upset, and now looking at the woman who has been living the life she believed was hers, feels something cold and certain settle in her chest. She doesn't believe it, not even close. The air at the table feels thinner now, as if the oxygen has been steadily leaking out since Nat finished talking. Elise hasn't moved. Her hands are flat on the linen, with her fingers spread out and her nails digging in just enough to produce tiny crescent markings that she will see later. She's been paying close attention to every word Nat chose, every pause that was meant to show sincerity, and every look that begged for understanding. And with each one, something inside Elise has been getting tighter, like a spring that has gone too far. She slowly and carefully lifts her eyes until they meet Nat's. Not yet, but her expression is not showing any rage, at least not the loud, exploding kind. Just a chilly, unblinking conviction that makes the moment feel heavier than any shout could. Elise comments, "Men and women can't just be friends." Her voice is soft, almost like she's talking to someone, but it slices through the noise of the restaurant like a knife through butter. Not really. Not when they share a toilet, pay for groceries together, and watch each other fall asleep on the couch after too much wine. Not when one of them is crying on the other person's shoulder at 3 a.m. and the other person stays. Not when months go by and the person they say they love never talks about it. She lets the words sink in and allows them time to do so. Nat opens her mouth, but no one will ever know if she is going to protest or explain. Elise doesn't stop. She goes on, her tone bland and seemingly tired. I've heard the shoulder to cry on story before. I've heard the version that says we're like siblings. I could say nothing ever happened in my sleep because I've heard it so many times, and every time it was a lie. People don't live like that, always in each other's pockets, day after day, night after night, until something brings them closer. Chemistry, ease, being alone, want. Call it whatever you wish. There it is. It's always there. And acting like it's not there won't make it go away. The leather of Joshua's chair creaks as he moves about in it. He seems like he wants to talk, but the words get stuck somewhere between his throat and his mouth. Elise doesn't look at him. She can't take her eyes off Nat, the lady who has been enjoying the calm home life that she thought was hers. Elise says, "You can dress it up however you want. You can talk about the hard times and how grateful you are and how beautiful and safe it all felt. But in the end, you were in my boyfriend's house, in his area, in his daily life, for 8 months. I was on the other side of the world sending him good morning texts and counting down the days until I could finally touch him. And he never told me, not even once." Her voice breaks on the last syllable, not because she's crying, but because the raw edge of betrayal finally breaks through the surface. She leans forward a little, putting her elbows on the table. She closes the distance without getting up from her seat. Don't sit there and tell me it was innocent. Don't tell me platonic fairy stories to hurt my feelings. I can see, and I'm not a child. I know what being close does. I know what happens when you stay up late. I know what happens when two people think the rules don't apply to them. The table is entirely quiet. The sound of cutlery clinking from surrounding diners also seems to disappear. Nat's calm mask has slipped. Her lips are pulled together in a thin line, and her cheeks are getting redder. Joshua looks at the centerpiece as if it may save him. And Elise, the lady who crossed an ocean for love, sits there with the clear mind of someone who has finally stopped wishing for the best and began facing the truth that she has known in her gut for a long time but would never confess it. She hasn't yelled once. She didn't need to. The bomb she just dropped was quiet, accurate, and very deadly. And it keeps going. After Elise says what she has to say, there is such a deep stillness that it seems like the rest of the restaurant has gone dark, leaving only this small circle of 3 individuals lit by the harsh light of reality. Nat's cheeks are red, and her lips are apart as if she's still looking for the right response, but no words emerge. Joshua's shoulders have stooped in, and he looks smaller than when Elise first saw him at the airport. It seems like the weight of both women's gazes is practically pushing him down. Elise isn't done yet. She can feel the change inside her. The hot, familiar burn of sexual jealousy is giving way to something colder, harsher, and more humiliating. It's not just about bodies anymore. It's all about power, about who has the keys to someone's survival every day, about what people will put up with, what they'll accept, and what they'll act like they don't see when the only other option is sleeping on the street. She carefully turns her head to look at Joshua, like someone who felt they knew him well would look at a stranger. He's staring at the tablecloth, tracing invisible lines in the linen, as if he could erase the last 10 minutes by concentrating hard enough. He hasn't stood up for Nat. He hasn't stood up for himself. He hasn't stood up for her. That silence, that conscious, determined choice not to speak, is louder than any confession. When Elise speaks again, her voice is softer than before, almost like she's thinking about something, like she's putting together a puzzle she didn't want to complete. "You've had trouble with money for a long time, haven't you?" she says to him. "You know this already." She's not accusing him, she's just presenting a fact. Rent is late. Bills are piling up. You said you were working extra shifts, but the numbers never quite tallied up. I offered to help more than once, but you always replied no, and that you would figure it out. You said you didn't want to bother me. She lets that hang for a second. But you didn't figure it out by yourself, did you? You found a different method, a less expensive way, a roof that didn't cost as much because someone else was already paying for most of it. Her eyes travel back to Nat, who is quite still. Elise goes on, "I'm not asking if you slept together." Her sentences are slow and careful. "I don't even care about that part anymore. I want to know how much of this friendship is really just being nice to someone because it's easy. How much of him remaining there is because he is thankful, and how much is because he has to. If he can't afford to leave, though, and going back to crashing on odd couches or worse is the only option, then he isn't choosing to be your roommate. He can't get out of there, and you're the one who has the leash." The word hits like a slap. This time, Nat flinches and her calm mask breaks wide open. Her hands make loose fists on the table, and her breathing gets shallow. Finally, Joshua raises his head and opens his mouth, but whatever he was going to say dies before it can be said. His eyes meet Elise's for a split second, guilty, tired, and begging. Then they drop again. Elise sits back a little in her chair and crosses her arms over her chest. The burning in her chest is still there. It just looks different now. What began as jealousy over perceived closeness has turned into something much worse. Hatred for a situation that turns the man she loves into someone who gives up his dignity for a place to stay. And also contempt for the lady who, whether she meant to or not, has become the gatekeeper of that refuge. The romantic fantasy she brought with her over the seas is gone today, and in its stead is something uglier and more genuine. This isn't about love triangles or late-night secrets anymore. This is about staying alive, about who pays the bills, about who gets to choose when the temporary deal is over. At that point, Elise knows for sure, and painfully, that sex wasn't the actual betrayal. It was a need. The kind that doesn't need passion to break trust, just money and the calm power it offers one person over another. She doesn't talk again right away. She doesn't have to. The accusation is already out there, like smoke after an explosion, and no one at the table can pretend it isn't there. Elise doesn't blink, doesn't think twice. The words she has been holding back since she read Joshua's frightened text message come out suddenly with surgical precision, and each one hits her harder than the previous. "Be honest, Nat," she adds in a low voice, but you can see she's finally stopped faking. "You have a financial grip on him." "You don't, do you?" Nat's eyes get bigger and the color in her cheeks fades to a lighter shade. Elise doesn't let her speak when she opens her mouth. "He's not here because he wants to be your best friend for life. He isn't here because he likes giving out Netflix passwords and dividing the bill for the electricity. He's here because he can't afford to go. The numbers doesn't work out every time he thinks about obtaining his own apartment. The rent is too high, the deposit is too high, and he's still paying off whatever trouble he got into before I met him. You know it, I know it, and he knows it too, deep down." This time she turns her head toward Joshua, making him look at her. He tries to look aside, but he can't find a place to hide. "You told me you were figuring things out. You said you didn't need my help, but you did need support from someone, right? And hers was easy. No strings, no questions, and no reminders that you should be working on something with me. All you need is a roof over your head, a fridge full of food, and someone who won't condemn you for being late. You stayed then, every month. While I was making plans for this trip, I was saving up for flights and imagining what our life would be like if we were actually in the same city. You stayed because leaving that door meant starting over from scratch, and you weren't ready for that. Elise's voice gets just loud enough to carry the full weight of the accusation without becoming a shout. So let's call it what it is. She doesn't live with you. She's your landlady and also gives you things. Not the sexual type, but the kind that keeps you alive. You can't live without steadiness right now, and she has it. A location to rest, a location to wash up, a place to act like you're still the man I fell in love with over video conversations. You pay rent with your allegiance every time you smile at her, thank her for supper, or stay quiet when she needs a shoulder to cry on. With your time, with your secrets, with everything that should have been mine. The table feels like it's frozen. Nat's hands are so firmly clenched that her knuckles are white. Her breathing has become rapid and shallow, like if someone punched her in the diaphragm. Her eyes are welling up with tears, but they haven't fallen yet. She looks really hurt, like the charge has cut through all the excuses she made for herself over the preceding 8 months. Joshua finally talks, but his voice is barely above a whisper. Elise, that's not fair. But the words don't mean anything to him. He doesn't go into detail, doesn't protect, doesn't say no. He just sits there, staring at the centerpiece again, his cheeks burning with the embarrassment that comes from being seen too plainly. Elise moves forward, putting her elbows on the table to close the remaining piece of space. I flew across the world for you, she says, her voice now softer and almost tender in its harshness. I had faith in us, and you let me think that while someone else was keeping you afloat. That's not being a buddy. That's not for a short time. That's dependence that looks like kindness. And I'm done acting like it's something else. The noise from the restaurant seems far away and unimportant now. The only sounds that matter are Nat's sharp breath, Joshua's fork clinking against the plate as his shaking hand knocks it over, and the slow, deliberate silence that follows Elise's last words. This is not a conversation anymore. This is an execution. Clean, ruthless, and impossible to undo. The bomb has gone off, and the fallout is just starting. The accusation is still there, like smoke from a gunshot that no one saw coming. No one moves for a long second. The restaurant's background noise sounds like it's miles away, just a dull hum that can't reach this table anymore. First, let's see how Nat reacts. Her face changes, but not into anger at first. It's something more raw and hurt. Her eyes get bigger and then smaller as the insult sinks in. That is so rude, she says, her voice shaking at the edges but getting stronger with each word. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me or what I've been through. To sit there and say, I'm what? Buying his trust? Like I'm a predator who goes after poor men? That's gross. Her eyes are full of tears now, not the slow, dramatic kind, but the quick, involuntary kind that come when someone has just lost all their dignity. She presses her lips together tightly to keep them from coming out, but one slips out and runs down her cheek. She angrily swipes at it, as if the tear itself has let her down. I never asked him to stay, she says, her voice breaking. I gave him the room because he was sleeping in his car some nights. I offered because I didn't want to see someone I cared about living on the street. And yes, it might have gotten comfortable. It's possible that we both got used to it. But to make that happen, to have him on a leash, that's mean. At that point, she looks at Joshua and searches his face for anything that might prove she hasn't been the bad guy in this story. But Joshua doesn't turn around. He's looking at his plate, which has a fork next to a piece of cold steak that he didn't eat. His jaw is so tight that a muscle in his cheek twitches. His hands are flat on the table with his fingers spread out, but they are shaking slightly, which is the only sign that the words have gotten to him. He doesn't say anything, doesn't shake, doesn't say no. He doesn't reach for Elise's hand, Nat's arm, or even his own glass of water. He just sits there, quiet, with his eyes downcast, letting the storm rage around him without doing anything to calm it, direct it, or even acknowledge it. That silence speaks louder than any apology could. It's the sound of a man who knows he's been caught in the same trap Elise talked about and has no way to defend himself. Elise keeps an eye on both of them. Her own face has become eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes after the worst has already been said. She doesn't have any tears on her face, no shaking. She knew for sure, in a quiet and tired way, that this moment, this exact brutal clash of truths, was the end of the fantasy she had been living for so long. The man she crossed an ocean for isn't the strong, self-sufficient partner she thought he would be. He was someone who let convenience turn into dependence, gratitude turn into obligation, and silence turn into betrayal. Nat moves her chair back an inch, and the legs scrape against the floor. "I think I'm done here," she says, in a thick voice. She stands up after looking at Joshua one last time. The look in her eyes shows pain, disappointment, and maybe even a hint of goodbye. She doesn't leave in a hurry. She doesn't hit anything hard. She carefully and slowly picks up her purse, as if the only thing she can still control is keeping her cool. Joshua is still not moving. Elise sees Nat walk away with her back straight and her shoulders stiff until she turns the corner and goes toward the exit. She only turns back to Joshua then. He finally looks up and meets her eyes. They have red edges and look glassy, and they are full of something that could be shame, grief, or both. But he still isn't talking. The long-distance dream is over. There are only 3 people left. One is walking away hurt, one is sitting quietly giving up, and one is staring at the wreckage of everything she believed in. She realizes that sometimes the worst betrayals don't come from passion, but from the small choices people make when they're too scared, too broke, or too comfortable to choose differently. The table is empty now, except for 3 plates that haven't been touched, and the heavy silence that is still there. The lights in the restaurant seem dimmer now, as if the fight took all the warmth out of the room. There are empty chairs around the table. Nat's chair is still pushed back from when she left suddenly, and Joshua's plate is pushed slightly away, as if he can't stand to look at it anymore. Elise stays seated, her posture straight but no longer stiff with rage. The adrenaline has worn off, leaving behind a strange, empty clarity. It was never really about finding a roommate for this dinner. It was never just about talking late at night, sharing rent, or even the question of whether lips ever met in the dark. Those were the easy accusations and the wounds on the surface. Underneath them was something much more basic and scary, the slow, hidden workings of power in a relationship that was supposed to be equal. Elise sees it now with brutal clarity. Joshua didn't just hide where he lived. He hid a dependency that changed every decision he made. Every time he sent her a text saying, "I'm fine," every time she asked about his plans and he said soon, and every time he changed the subject when money came up, it was all because he knew that leaving Nat's apartment would mean losing the only stability he had. Thankfulness had slowly turned into duty. Friendship had slowly turned into a deal that was paid for in silence and little things that happened every day. And love, the long-distance love Elise had been nurturing for so many months, had quietly been put on hold until he could get through it. Nat's tears, her hurt protests, and her insistence that she never asked him to stay were all real, but they were also not important. Intent does not eliminate consequence. If you offer someone who is drowning shelter, you are not innocent if that shelter turns into a cage they can't leave because they are too scared or too poor. Power doesn't always come in the form of chains or orders. It can look like kindness that never quite lets go, a spare key, a shared grocery list, or a couch that is always open just a little too long are some examples. And what about Joshua's silence during all of this? That was the most honest confession of the night. He couldn't defend his choices because he couldn't. He didn't reach for Elise because he knew he had lost the right to do so. He didn't go after Nat because he realized, maybe for the first time, that staying had cost him both women in different ways. He just sat in the wreckage, unable to speak, as the moment came when his carefully compartmentalized life fell apart because of its own contradictions. Elise can feel the change inside her, like a lock turning. The jealousy that used to eat her up has burned itself out, and now she feels something colder and more lasting: disillusionment. She doesn't wonder if anything happened between them anymore. Instead, she wonders how long she would have been willing to believe half-truths that looked like hope. How long she was willing to love a man who mostly lived in pixels and promises, while the real man was being quietly changed by circumstances and convenience. This wasn't a love triangle after all. There was a triangle of power. One person who has money and a place to live, one person who has no other options, and one person who thought love could last over distance, secrets, and unmet needs, until she saw, with heartbreaking clarity, that it can't. The psychological battlefield is calm now. No more blasts. The ash is slowly settling over what used to be a dream. Elise finally lets out a deep, steady breath. She reaches for her luggage, moving slowly and carefully. There won't be a big exit or a speech at the end. She has already stated all that needs to be said. The simple, harsh truth is that sometimes the worst betrayals don't come from love, lying, or even cheating. They emerge from the silent choices people make when honesty isn't as important as survival, and from the people who love them who decide too late that survival isn't enough. She gets up. The chair makes a quiet noise as it moves across the floor. Joshua looks up at her, his eyes glazed over and his mouth opening to say words that never come. Elise doesn't wait for them. She leaves the table. The cold food, the guy who let dependence become destiny, and the idea that love can continue through every unsaid agreement. The noise of the restaurant slowly comes back behind her. Glasses clinking, people talking in quiet voices, and life going on as if nothing bad had just happened. But for the three people who sat at that table, things will never be the same. The commotion from the restaurant is back in full force. Clinking glasses, overlapping conversations, and the quiet hum of life going on. But at this table, time seems to have stopped. The plates are no longer warm. The wine is sitting there, forgotten. What started as a long-awaited reunion has turned into quiet destruction, the kind that doesn't need loud shouts or broken glass to create permanent scars. Elise stands up slowly with careful motions, as if every quick movement could break something inside her that is already weak. She glances down at Joshua one final time. His eyes are still on the table, red-rimmed and watery, and they are heavy with all the choices he didn't make tonight. He opens his mouth, maybe to say sorry, maybe to explain, or maybe just to utter her name, but nothing comes out. The silence that has been with him all night stays with him until the end. She doesn't wait for words that will never come. She doesn't give consolation or closure. She just picks up her bag, smooths the front of her dress with one hand, and walks away from the table. Every stride feels easier than the last, not because the anguish is gone, but because she is no longer carrying the illusion by herself. Joshua is still sitting behind her, his shoulders bowed, looking at the empty chair where Nat used to sit, and the empty space where Elise now walks. The man who spent months trying to keep two universes in balance has lost both in one night. He doesn't go along. He doesn't shout. He just sits there, surrounded by the ruins of secrets he thought he could protect forever. The cool air outside feels nice on Elise's skin. Streetlights bounce off of the wet pavement from a shower she didn't see. She stops on the pavement and takes a deep breath for what feels like the first time since the plane landed. The long-distance dream, the late-night conversations, the countdowns, and the promises of forever has fallen apart because of reality. There is no more hate, not even fury. Just the quiet, unchangeable certainty that love can't last when one person is living two lives and the other only knows half the truth. She takes out her phone, opens the ride-sharing app, and books a ride to the airport. There won't be a big goodbye scene or a last fight in the hotel lobby. She won't sleep under the same sky as the man who allowed her dependence turn into betrayal again. She will go home, not to solve anything or wait, but to start over on her own terms. The automobile pulls over. She gets into the back seat, tells the driver the name of the terminal, and then watches the lights of the city slip by the window again. This time, they don't seem like promises. They feel like distance, clean, needed, and over. In a restaurant that isn't very busy, two people are sitting in separate silences, each carrying the weight of the choices they made to stay alive. A fresh chapter is waiting for her somewhere ahead. It's not flawless or glorified, but it's honest. For the first time in a long time, being honest feels like freedom.